Appreciate it. My name is Pat Lee. I am the director of an art fair called Frieze Seoul. We just had our third edition last year, and our fourth is rapidly approaching early September. We hold the fair concurrently with an art fair called Kiaf. It's the Korea International Art Fair. It's run by the Gallery Association of Korea. And this year, we're very excited because with the support of KAMS, which is the Korean Arts Management Service, it's under the Ministry of Culture, they've supported a wonderful selection of 20 galleries from Kiaf. I think you've seen the signs there interspersed throughout the fair. So we're very excited to have them here in this initiative. It's a great partnership. So I hope you have the chance to see these galleries. Today's talk is Korean art today. It's a very broad talk, as you know, but I would say our goal is to really give you sort of a snapshot of the short history of the scene, Korean contemporary art, where we are now, maybe a glimpse into the future, and really it's through the insight and experience of our panel. So I was going to give you that little glimpse, and I'm very excited about that. So I think right now I'll start just by a brief introduction of our panel. Actually, before I do that, I want to say we're very excited to be in Chicago. In my former life, I was a gallerist with 2 different Korean galleries, and I actually showed here at Expo Chicago a number of times. And coming to Chicago, it's just a wonderful city. I very much appreciate how you value culture and the arts. I love the sense of community here, so I just wanted to say it's really an honor to be back in Chicago, and thank you all for attending. I would start first by saying that Korea is really having its moment, right? You're all here today to learn more about this, but you see people talking about the artistic output in all fields, whether it's Korean film, as you know, music, literature, with Hangang winning the Nobel Prize, with architecture, fashion, all realms, of course, art. And I would say that, people say it's so hot or it's like an overnight thing. It's not. And I hope today you realize that the development of the Korean arts has been organic over decades. And it really centers around the impressive artistic practice. And how does one get validation of this artistic practice? It's a wonderful sort of machination of the art world. It's a ton of different players sort of advocating and using their influence to speak on behalf of the artist. So I hope today we get a glimpse of that machination through the eyes of our panelists today. I think I'm going to start with Jiseon. And I'm going to do a little bit of a longer lead-in just for Jiseon. But, the history of Korean contemporary art is a relatively short one. Many people tie the Olympics in 1988 as sort of a focal point. 1988 was a time where we just had like sort of the first sort of democratic elections. Korea, of course, had a military dictatorship up on that point. A lot of social, political change happened at that time. After 1988, Korean artists and students were able to travel more freely, having visas. In the mid-90s, you had institutions that were first established, like the Gwangju Biennale and Busan Biennale, first established in the mid-90s. The Korea Pavillion in Venice, also mid-90s. Institutions like Art Sonje, founded in the mid-90s. Galleries sort of starting to transition with a view to be primary galleries working with artists, the establishment of nonprofit spaces. So it was very sort of recent, I think. And one of the things I like to ask Jiseon first is with your artist hat, because at that time, you had the first sort of wave of Korean artists that were able to study abroad, work abroad, the first ambassadors who were very articulate, intelligent, who were sort of able to sort of infiltrate and advocate and be ambassadors. So when I think about the 90s, I think of artists such as your contemporaries like Do Ho-seo, for instance, or Nikki Lee at the time, or Kang Ik-jung, or maybe, Kim Soo-ja, of course, Kim Soo-ja, Lee Soo-kyung, maybe a little later. And these artists were the first to sort of go into abroad. And you also, as an artist, I'm really interested because you graduated from Ewha, a very prestigious university. I believe you came to the States late 90s, early 2000s. So you were actually at a time where we were seeing people able to travel abroad. I really wanted to ask, in your artist hat, what it was like at that time. What was your compulsion to actually want to come to the States and eventually stay in the States and just get a sense of that time and what it was like back then? Is that too broad a question? Or?
Yes. And I think you said everything I was going to say. But I'm going to say it's a combination of sort of intentional decisions and environmental factors that encouraged me to come to the US. But it's right that most of the time, I mean, Korea that we know now was very different Korea that I grew up with or in. I did most of my schooling under the government that was more tends to be a dictatorship or authoritarian kind of structure in it. So by the time I went to college, it was in 90s. And finally, we were able to see a little bit more cultural shift, let's put it that way. There was a little bit more exchange of ideas and free expressions and kind of desire to get out of the country and explore. So there are a lot of cultural changes, I think, and also individualistic kind of approach to how we think and what we do in 90s. So I'm that generation, basically. And then some of our college professors, not all, it was rare, were also educated in US, for example. So one of my college professors, Sung-soon Lee, was an alumni of the School of Art Institute of Chicago. So when you see something like that, it kind of reminds you that, oh, actually there is an opportunity that you can have outside of the country and kind of work towards that. So that was probably one of the reasons that I was motivated. But at the same time, it was also kind of encouraged by experiences that I probably had in Korea, primarily as a woman as well. And also my family is from North Korea. So we also have a lot of kind of perhaps challenges and difficulties that we experience as a family that kind of lived in my heart, per se. So there was always this longing that I want to get out of my comfort zone and explore something that was not allowed for me or given to me in Korea. And it's a very abstract thing, right? And also, in 90s, I came here, it was before the internet was widely used. So it existed, but it's not like you can use it to understand the information online about your field or the US art scene. So I saw everything in the journal, the magazines or book that was like at least few months old, if not a couple of years old. So all the information I'm getting was delayed. So I also felt I'm missing something. Like there is something happening outside of my environment, I'm not getting it. So I think that was the biggest probably reason that I wanted to come to the US. Yeah.
Interesting, and I know that in the early 90s even, they always talk about this exhibition, the Whitney Biennale exhibition that was showed at the MMCA in Gwacheon. Many artists, older artists that I met and spoke with said that was the first time that many of them were able to see artworks like this, in person. And you mentioned the publications too. The mid-90s were a time when some of the publications began. And I know some artists like Mo Bak or Bak Yi-so was one of the few that actually came back and tried to engage in that sort of dialogue. He had Open Minor Injury in New York, sort of this legendary art nonprofit art space. Unfortunately, died tragically very early, but he was one of the first to come back and sort of to instill that dialogue and try to assist nonprofit spaces. So there was that sort of dialogue as well. And I also like to ask, the influence of, say, people like Nam June-paik, for instance. He's sort of considered like a godfather in a way. He was instrumental in, I believe, the Korea Pavillion in Venice, and he was also instrumental in sort of promulgating ideas in Korea. Was that something that you felt that he was sort of that sort of figure? Because you sort of hear these sort of mythical things about his influence in Korea, and I'd just like to know, as a student at the time, did you feel that influence?
Yes, I mean, I hear about all these amazing artists out there that who were out of our reach, right? And then they were, just like you said, they were mythical, like a mythical being that we never seen in Korea, actually. And they were not very actively working in Korea. They were mostly out there, outside of Korea, Europe, or the US. So while we are hearing about them, we didn't necessarily know very much about their work or experience their work in person very much. So what I did was this odd thing, actually. I really like this first, because my background is fibers. I really like this first generation fiber artist whose name is Tom Lundberg. So I only liked his work that I saw on paper, you know, in the magazine or book. And I found out that he actually was teaching in Colorado State University. I've never been to Colorado, never mind the US, okay? So I applied for the graduate program in Colorado State University just to work with him, not knowing him, not knowing where Colorado is or who he is like. So it could have been an insane experience. So I arrived to Colorado, and that was the first time that I kind of saw the US for the first time. That, wow, this is very different environment than Seoul that I grew up. And I stayed there for 2 years, almost in solidarity, because with other very few graduate students who are isolated from, again, outside world in the US. So it was really interesting experience for me to have that experience. But from there, I moved to many different states before I come to Chicago. So, you know, seeing so many Korean galleries and artists represented in this Chicago Expo is actually really surprising to me. It's almost, it happened. I know it happened, or it's been developing last 26 years. I've been living in US, but it feels like it's overnight achievement. I know it takes a lot of work and a lot of will from artists and also government and gallerists. I think that's what maybe the Korea is good at. They just work towards the goal. You know, they came here, and it's an amazing feeling actually to this much kind of development and success altogether in Chicago. Yeah.
I would also say, yes, exactly right. And when I talked earlier about the art world machinations, you know, this crazy art world that we're in, of course we all know what that's composed of, but I would say the infrastructure in Korea, of course, the artists, the schools, the galleries, the nonprofits, the collectors, art fairs, the writers, the critics, you know, that infrastructure has been growing organically. But I think what we're talking about when we talk about how everyone is having interest in what's happening in Korea, what we're seeing is really the ability of that art world, both here in Korea, also diaspora, to link with the global art world, which is also has its own machinations composed of those similar people. So I think that decades that you're talking about has been happening organically. You're seeing the fruits of the labor of this incredible network of people. It's a very symbiotic relation. Everyone in those buckets working very hard to articulate, to advocate on behalf of the artistic practice. So I'd like to say that really it's the organic development of that process, and that's what we're seeing right now. It might seem overnight, but it really is the labor of what we're seeing over the decades, and we'll get into that a bit more, but just want to put that in context. So I think it's very interesting. I'd like to move on. Second question I had, actually, because of course, a practicing artist coming to Korea and then getting into this incredible role as the president of the School of Arts Institute of Chicago. I mean, that is, it's an incredible leadership position. You know, we have Korean Americans who now, their experience over decades getting into positions of influence and positions where they can advocate, but fascinated about that part of your journey, because you and how that happened. Actually, I know it's another big question, but to get to where you are, I think it'd be quite interesting to hear how you got into arts administration and why, and then I'll ask a bit more about your goals in that respect.
Well, after I'm done with my second MFA in the U.S., I started teaching as a tenure track faculty member in East Carolina University in North Carolina, and that's how I started my teaching career. Probably more out of selfish reasons. I wanted to continue my art practice throughout my life. And one of the ways that I could probably get into that was teaching at the same time so I can sustain myself as an artist and researcher. So I started it with a pretty selfish reason, I'm going to say. But quickly after I started teaching, I realized teaching is not about that. It's actually about students. And I engage with students that I realized that there are so many things they bring into the table that is going to be reflected upon myself and also my practice altogether. And I think one thing happened another. I think I then started to have a little bit more interest in more systematic structural changes in higher art education, and I realized that I have developed skills and experience for it. So from my teaching position, I started to kind of move on to the administration, and now I joined the SAIC last July as a president. And this school, SAIC, is the school that I've been admiring from outside for a long time because, like I said, I've been working as a fiber artist, and SAIC is also known for its fibers program as well, with all other programs. So whenever, as an artist, whenever I do the exhibitions or panel discussion like this, or even as a chair and dean to hire faculty member, many of them were SAIC graduates. So, from outside, I had a lot of experience to work with them. So coming here, now working from inside is a great honor for me, actually, to engage with. And now, whenever we go to art fair, including Expo Chicago, I see a lot of our alumni artists actually presented in art fairs as well, both Frieze in LA and Miami, Basel, and New York, and here. You cannot get away from them. So you see a lot of success that school contributed for our alums to actually be successful and kind of influence and lead the creative force in the US. But I also see it in Korea. I was actually there last March. And I see a lot of artists actively exhibiting, like Myungbom Kim that you are seeing in the slide, and also Lee Fee, I think, who's been very recognized and gained a lot of reputation. But also all the prominent colleges and universities in Seoul and South Korea has SES alumni now teaching as their faculty. So I can tell very clearly the influence that SEIC has on them and also on the Korean creative kind of art and design scene as well. So it's super rewarding for me personally, but also really proud of our alumni's achievement out there too.
Absolutely, I was going to actually mention that point. Also, gallerists. There are a number of very talented younger gallerists in Korea who graduated from the school as artists and now leading galleries. So that's another area of influence. I just have one more question. In your role as president, I mean, obviously, do you have a chance to still teach, or are you just focusing on the administration, setting the strategic goals, operations?
Yeah, I'm no longer teaching. Last time I think I was in the classroom was 2018, and since then my work is more to do with schools. Strategic plans and also engagement with internal and external community members. Although I try to have that experience, so school has a Crit Week, so we have a critique week for our graduate students work for a week a semester, I believe. So I also go there and try to observe and sort of participate in the critique as well. So I don't lose my edge, and also seeing their work and how they talk about their work always energize me, and also is intellectually and creatively really curious process. So I love it.
Thanks, Jiseon. I have a lot more questions for you, but I'm going to move on to Seolhui first, and we come back. But as an ex-gallerist, when I think of the art world, the curators, to me, on par with some of the most important people that the gallery has to deal with to advocate, because the curators are really the ones that advocate the most and work closely with the artists, right? So I think the influence of the Korean curators, the Korean American curators that are advocating for not only practice of the Korean artists, obviously, but their voice is have been incredibly instrumental in where we are today, and why we're seeing a lot more Korean artists on the global stage. I can name so many that I've worked with and been friends with throughout the decades, really. We can list the names. Even Jessica Hong, who did In Situ, she's at the Kemper, a very talented Korean American curator. Of course, we can list so many that are influential right now. Sun Jung Kim in Korea, for instance, Clara Kim in Mocha. We have Victoria Sung up in Berkeley, Kyung An at the Guggenheim. I shouldn't keep listing names because I'm going to forget them, but there's so many. And also foreign curators actually also who have really sort of supported the Korean practice. Of course, Seolhui is, in my mind, one of the most talented ones. And interestingly, when you first started, we first met working with Moon and Jun, I think. Moon and Jun are practitioners who, incredibly influential. And I think at the time, we were helping them with a project. I think it was the News from Nowhere project. And this project has been ongoing for a long time. It's been manifested at Documenta, Tate Liverpool, the Korean Pavillion in Venice, of course, Migros Museum, even here in Chicago at the Spencer Museum, I think they did an iteration. It's an ongoing project. But you've also worked with sort of these like titans of the Korean contemporary art, like Minuk Lim, Kim Won-suk. These are sort of very influential artists, very intellectual, very difficult artists, I think. Their expectations are incredibly high. So your start actually started more from that sort of institutional context, I think. You started from the start with that. And when I look back on some of your projects in Busan and also the Korean Art Prize at the MMC, it's sort of mind-boggling to see those 4 artists that were in the prize at that time, because they were very established artists. But I'd just like to get your sort of backstory of how you started and how you choose artists, or how they choose you to work with. And then I'll ask more questions about your recent projects. But
first of all, thank you so much for being in here, and thank you so much for the Pat and then Tyler and to organize all this program. It was actually 2011, and I started working for MMCA, which is National Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art in South Korea. You may heard about it, and MMCA has 4 branches right now, and Seoul and Gwacheon and Doksu Palace and out of Seoul. But when I started working for the National Museum, there was only 2 branches. So it was like the moment we are really thinking about how we could extend the Korean National Museum by getting supporting by private museums, private like companies, and many other things. So I chose work for a National Museum, and basically I studied in South Korea, majored in art history, and there was actually not much options when I graduated university, and either working for galleries or national museums, and the Contemporary Art Museum means in South Korea at that time, and MMCA or Seoul Museum of Art. So, of course, MMCA is a much bigger university and much bigger museum than the Seoul Museum of Art. That means there's more job opportunities. So I was intern the first time, and then I became a coordinator and assistant curator, where I work with 4 artists Pat mentioned, Moon Kyung-won, Jeon Juno, and Minung Lim, and Kim Won-suk, and Lee Soo-kyung. So at that time, they were mid-40s, and they are born in 1960s, and those artists had experience and Koreans upheaval histories like Gwangju Massacre and the uprising when they were teenagers. And then they decide to move to the Korea to study abroad, like Jiseon said. And those generations are always like interesting about like how international artists has been switching around in South Korea, how their practice is like navigating all the kind of different knowledge is based on the different structures. So I do say I was very privileged to work there, and it was actually for the like award system is supported by SBS Foundation, which is a Korean private like broadcasting system, and they suggest the MMCA museum to work together for the promote mid-career artists to open the door in the international art scene. So I got a job opportunity, of course, and then to engage this project, and I was really fascinated by that process because I do believe in the museum. If museum has a strong system, an art is always growing really well. So that's like a fundamental and foundation system. It's very important for me as being a curator. And of course, like at that time, I was assistant curator. That means like I did so many hidden jobs you may not seen the invisible. Like, then like that's how also I met the Pat. And so, and those artists, working with those artists was really incredible because we kept questioning what is Korean contemporary art. We just kept questioning what is Korean identities working for the art scene. And because they study abroad, they came back to South Korea like early 2000. And then at that time, art scene is getting growing, but still we have been thinking about what is international presentations being in like Korean artists working for the like art institution abroad. So because also lack of information, obviously that was true. And then also we actually had no idea how much budget we have to spend to present the new commissions, many other things. So we start actually researching for the like a big major museum, I do say like a Tate Modern and MoMA and all the like major museums abroad, how they have been working with like mid-career artists, how they like promote their practice abroad. So that's why Korean Artist Prize, it popped up, and because we researched for the like Turner Prize, basically. So Turner Prize, they actually nominated 4 around the candidates and by selecting committees. And of course, like a majority of their funding is supported by Channel 4, which is also a private broadcasting system in London. So that actually works really out well. And obviously, we got also the other way around, we got a kind of a critical, like discourses like, do we need to competitive for the contemporary art? Those kind of things. So basically, it's a nomination system, and then like we let them do whatever they want, and we support, and then SBS Foundation pay for their production fee and the commission fee, and then the jury members eventually select one winner, and they got like a final grant. So those artists at that time, and they actually has a really incredible and then different also perspective, and such as Min Rim, and she's a multimedia artist who has been dealing with lots of Korean political and unification trauma in South Korea, more like engaged in our modern and contemporary art history. And Moon and John is more like an interdisciplinary artist. They have been keep questioning and to meet a lot of professionals around the world. What does it mean to doing art, many other things. And Kim Hong-seok is more like he's a sculptor, and he just keep like interesting about what is interpretations between sculptures, installations, and also docent and the narrative, many other things. Lee Soo-kyung, obviously, she's like amazing artist who really pursue aesthetic visions and high standard, many other things. So I was actually 25 at that time, and then like I just like remember I was so excited to meet artists every day. Because like being around and holding like drills and then like also put the nails together, they just keep talking. It's like, have you seen the exhibitions from Tate Modern? You know, they just kind of bring all the kind of interesting stuff to me as for young curator. Then like I just keep questioning, what does it mean exhibitions? You know, many other things. Yeah, that's actually my first kind of curator practice. So that means I got a really strong kind of foundation in my practice. Yeah.
I remember that time very well. 1J is my business partner. We had a gallery called 1NJ at the time, and we were working really in the thick of that. And working with Moon and John at the time, I remember, like you, it was my first time working with sort of a different level of like sort of international curators and things like that. And in that context, very memorable. And around the same time, if I point to some of the biennales when like Massimiliano Gioni did his biennale, I think that was kind of a real inflection point because I recall at that time, it was really the first time that many people came to Gwangju from abroad. I mean, not that they hadn't before, but that the level of the people that came, I remember he brought collectors and curators, and that was really a seminal time, I remember, because people came and they were like, oh, this is really interesting, like what's happening. I think from that moment on, I really felt in Korea sort of hit an inflection. It was an inflection point. After that, I think Jessica Morgan did her Gwangju after that, and it was an interesting time. I think that was an important time, I think. But anyway, onwards to you're moving to Europe. I am very interested because you're based in Denmark. We don't get to see you enough, but I think we're going a little over time. But I wanted to really ask, obviously, about your experience curating the Korea Pavilion. Of course, working with the amazing artist Koo Jung-ah. I don't know if many of you had a chance to visit. The project was called Odorama Cities, and yeah, very fascinating project. They really transformed the pavilion. It was this sort of sensory, sort of olfactory sort of experience. You'd come in and they'd collected several hundred sort of scents from reminiscences from Korea, and that is an incredible project. Getting that project, I'm sure, was a challenge. I don't even know the process. I'm sure it's very political, very competitive, but it is a very important project and a very important stage. So I'd love to hear how that happened and your experience getting that project and the influence and working with Koo Jung-ah.
Basically, curating Korean Pavilion, and there was open call for artistic director, and so organized by the Korean Art Council. So I actually co-curated with Danish curator called Jacob Fabricius, and we worked together for the Busan Biennale 2020. And since that, and we figured out exchanging for the curators incredibly magical moment, the sharing knowledge and the, like sharing practical activities, and then also we do believe sharing is a caring. That's obviously I'm always happy to work with him. So when we saw the open call, we just talked about it's like a Christmas 2023, what I believe, or 22. And then why don't we apply? You know, just we was very humble, and then shall we apply? And let's do that. And then that means we have to select the artist and then submit a new proposal plan. But obviously, there was no wonder we asked Koo Jung-ah to work together. And basically also Koo Jung-ah, she was also born in the 1964, and she studied abroad in École de Beaux-Arts, and she left South Korea in 1992. Since then, she never come back. But I figured out Koo Jung-ah's practice really incredible, but I only recalled I saw her practice only abroad, not in South Korea. And then I felt somehow, why couldn't you see the Koo Jung-ah's practice in South Korea? She's a very established and acclaimed artist around the world. Then figured out Koo Jung-ah has been a bit foreigner in South Korea. That's also my point of view was very interesting. And so that means Koo Jung-ah never had a solo show in National Museum in South Korea. So that was actually our curiosity. Why? How that happened? And museum has only few collections, but the old incredible museum like Guggenheim and the old well-known museum has Koo Jung-ah's collections. So we're trying to figure out what is the balance between the artists being in South Korea or out of South Korea, and then to present amazing practice around the world and not really showing in South Korea. What does it mean? You know, those kind of identities I keep questioning. Then, and what we are actually fascinated by Koo's practice, we figured out that Koo has dealt with the scent project when she was university. It was 1996, the first scent artwork she made ever. Then since that, and slowly presenting a center product. But as you may know, Koo's practice is not really incredibly shouting out in the audience. It's very minimal gestures and the simple interventions to the space and all the mediums. That's what we thought about. It's very aesthetic vision. Wow, this is really amazing artist. We can talk about many other things. Then of course, we suggested Koo Jung-ah, and Koo said yes. And we talked about we would like to do scent project. Of course, it was such a challenging project we suggested her, because the scent is basically invisible. It's hard to say visible presentation, many other things. Then we actually have been discussing about how could we make a proposal. And artists actually came up with incredible idea. Korea is still divided country in north and south, but we know we have been dealing with many kind of united, some project such as the DMG and many other things. But Koo suggested I'd like to combine North and South Korea by collecting scent memories. It was such an incredible sentence what she described us, and then the other way around, we are curator. Oh my God, how could we deal with that kind of a million-dollar questions? Then we getting started we have to get the scent memories from the people who has been to North and South Korea. And so we did a scent memory open calls, and it was very simple questions, ask people, and could you donate your scent memory related to North and South Korea? Then it was an incredible moment because I met a lot of Korean adoptees in Denmark, basically, and they got, adapted to Denmark when they are 2 or 3. But they can't remember their biological parents, but they remember the smell of their mom's chest or something like that. So they just donated incredible scent memories, and of course lots of foreigners, they shared their memories about the Pyongyang, and then because South Koreans are not allowed to visit the North Korea, but foreigners, they could possibly to visit there. So we collected 600 scent memories, and then we organized everything, and the artist read, and who actually selected many of scent memories, what artists thought about it's very meaningful. And then we sent those memories to the perfumer, because perfumer is a creator to make a scent. Then we have been working with 16 perfumers also around the world. And also it was very interesting to see how perfumer interpreted based on text to the smell. So there was a basic structures. And then of course curating the Korean pavilion is very much privileged experience for us. And that means we have much more responsibilities to present the Korean art, and also how also we could engage our dialogue to the other pavilion altogether. So yeah, that's basically we did. Yeah.
It was a wonderful experience. I think the response was amazing, and I think huge congrats on that, because it's not a project you can take lightly. I'm sure you were very busy during that time with press interviews and really advocating. So I think it was a great success. So, and how did you end up in Denmark? May I ask quickly? Is that because you've been there now for a number of years, and that's where your home is, and your practice is based there?
Yeah, I do say curiosities, basically. I know it sounds very simple, but the thing is for me, it's being a curator, it's more like a mediator. I want to be really good neighbor. I want to be just a humble person in between audience and artist. That's basically my goal. And of course, it was triggered to working with a Danish curator for the Busan Biennale, and who actually was my co-curator for the Korean Pavilion. And when I worked with GAoK, and actually my side, Nordic art scene, and I always think about design, much more like the literature, and I just ask him very silly question, do you have fine art in Denmark and Nordic? Because I feel why would I not know any Danish artists? You know what I mean? And then of course there's a few Danish art. I'm trying to make kind of a bit interesting dialogue. Then he just introduced many other Danish artists. I really fascinated by that. And then I figured out in South Korea, no one talked about Nordic art scene. That's I feel a lack of information, in the lack of kind of deliberate person. No one talked about it. That means I could do that, and somehow, and then also I was really the Danish structures and they are talking architecture, theater, design, performance, and literature, and also music. It's all things simultaneously. So it's really incredible to be in there, even though it is a small country. And also my side is also kind of getting to know system is very important to support the artists. How could judge about artist fee and all the exhibitions and many other things. But Denmark has amazing kind of art founding system, of course, which is a warfare country and which is the happiest country around the world because they got treated really well. So that's actually one of my goals, and trying to collect all those kind of knowledge and philosophies about dealing with many administrative work, bring to the South Korea, and to discuss about how could we make even structures, equality structures, working with artists and all the different exhibitions. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to Andy St. Louis. So Andy, interesting, your story, because you actually came the opposite direction. You came from the US to Korea, and you've been in the art world now for some time. I remember the early days, Andy would go to every art show. He was involved in lectures with institutions like Art Sonje. He wrote essays for Art Gallery. And I'm just curious, like, what compelled you first to come to Korea? What was the compulsion, and also to stay? And eventually, we'll get to your book and everything. But you've really been sort of a big presence in the Korean contemporary art world. So I'm just really curious how you ended up coming to Korea. What was that? What was the reasoning and that sort of history?
Sure, thank you. I think the compulsion to go to Korea maybe is less interesting than the reasons why I decided to stay, but the sort of event that precipitated my first visit was the economic recession in the United States. It started in 2008, and when I finished university in 2009, with an art history degree, I was sort of looking for what I might be able to do with that, since no one was hiring anymore, and it was sort of a bleak job market landscape. So I ended up coming to Korea and teaching English, actually, initially. As many of my classmates sort of pivoted to alternate ways of earning a living for a brief time. But this was in 2009, and what really compelled me to stay and to become more involved in the art world was just finally realizing that there was this whole art world that was not just like existing, but actually thriving and growing, and it was really inspiring. And not just the art that I was seeing, but also the sort of art ecosystem that it all sort of composed. In 2009, the art scene was much smaller than it is now, but it still had the same energy. And it had amazing institutions, the National Museum that Seolhui was talking about, the Seoul Museum of Art, and some smaller institutions like Art Sonje Center we mentioned. But also a really sort of robust art residency ecosystem, amazing art schools. And I would say the art scene at that time was a bit more sort of grassroots, or it was more sort of community driven. And it was sort of the end, as I see, of like the first phase of the development of the Korean art world. And it was being led by several alternative art spaces, like Art Space Pool. There was also Samji Space and Residency that was just shutting down at the time. Yeah. And then soon after that, we had the Dansekwa boom. Liu Fan had a solo show at the Guggenheim in 2011. And then 2013 was when like Park Seo-bo and Ha Jong-hyun and Yoon Hyung-gun and all these sort of masters of Korean minimal monochrome painting really burst onto the international scene. So I would say, yeah, I became inspired definitely by what I was seeing, and also motivated because I knew nothing about it before I had come to Korea. It was very hard to learn anything about the Korean art world. It wasn't the early internet of the 1990s, but it was still not the internet of YouTube and Wikipedia, where you can really access all kinds of information. And so I saw a huge gap in terms of not just awareness, but education, and so I wanted to see what I could do to bring this art to a wider audience and put it in front of more eyeballs, because I really believed that it was an essential and very vital part of the international art world and deserved a lot more recognition.
And Andy has a wonderful website called Seoul Art Friend. It used to be called Seoul Art Fiend back in the day, and it was almost like a blog, and you would write about amazing art shows that you saw. But I'd like to ask you, before we end and get to the Q&A, but really your book focusing on the millennial artist, right now, as you say, the first phase, I do agree with you. We had those first phases of the nonprofits. Many of them don't exist anymore. But right now, in Korea today, honestly, I find a lot of the nonprofits and artist-run spaces, small spaces, that I love going to see very compelling sort of younger artists showing. I mean, that's the place where I go to Uchu. I like that. I love that. They're too young to have like gallery representation, but there's a nice energy there, and I think I'm wondering if you sense that the foreigners who come, the curators, do you feel like they're sort of tapped into that? Is at that level, and then also how you got to get to your book and write your book, which has been a great success.
Sure. I think, comparisons are often made between Seoul as an art hub and a city like Hong Kong or Singapore these days. And I think what makes Seoul a more, active hub is that, Hong Kong really gets going once a year for Art Basel Hong Kong. And yes, they have museums and of course they have galleries and always good shows, but it's not as activated year-round as Seoul is. So if you come to Frieze, Seoul, and Kiaf in September, you'll also see one or two of the three major biennial exhibitions that coincide also in September. This year is Media City Seoul Biennale, the Seoul International Biennial Exhibition. But if you don't come during September, during Art Week, any other time of year that you come, you will have a wealth, an abundance of options, not just of openings, but of amazing institutional shows, of shows at foundations and nonprofits, and of course at the galleries. The amount of exhibitions that are happening in Seoul is really overwhelming. And so it really is a year-round art destination, not just a once-a-year sort of stop on the circuit. And so I think that is maybe not well known amongst the global public, and people think I have to just go in September because that's when everything's happening, and it's really not. It's happening all year round. As Pat said about the younger artists and how it ties into my book, Pat was saying that a lot of them don't have gallery representation, but actually in the book, quite a lot of them do now have gallery representation, and we're now in sort of the second phase, I think, of the Korean art world's development. And it began in 2017 when Pace and Perotang came to Seoul, opened their satellite locations. And then in 2018, Lehman Mopen came, and they were already starting to work with Korean artists. Lehman Mopen was working with Ibul and Seo Do-ho. Pace began working with Lee Gun-yong shortly after that. But we are seeing Korean galleries now in this second phase, I think sort of inspired or catalyzed maybe by the way that Western galleries often operate, really scouting and really looking into the next generation, not just for the artists and for the art scene, but also, as a business strategy, obviously, to have support these careers going forward. And so in the book, it was more gallery representation than I actually had realized. And not just Korean galleries, but also getting representation outside of Korea in Western galleries that are now in the city.
Almost indicative of the next phase, I think, actually, because these young galleries, there's more communication, there's more presence, I think, on the international stage. I know we're running a bit late. I was going to ask a final question to the future, but maybe we can open up maybe for some questions. If not, then I will ask you an ending question. But I would just like to end, before we do that, just I have a note saying, well, obviously, we can really just touch the surface, but, I think we're in a very good place, in terms of the exposure of the Korean art practice. And I was just thinking to myself, just last year at Frieze London in October, if you were there last year, the presence of Korean artists in that city was tremendous. I mean, Mire Lee was the Turbine Hall Commission. It was amazing. Haegyu Yang had a very nice retrospective at the ICA. Min Suk-cho, amazing architect, that did the Serpentine Pavillion. And there was a nice performance artist, Kim Hyung-jung, who was showing at the ICA, and that's just 4 at the same time in London. And this year, very excited about artists like Ah-young Kim, who's in your book. Ah-young is a great artist that I had the pleasure also of working with, showing at the Hamburger Bahnhof right now, had a great installation at the ACC, We'll be showing at PS1 later this year. So yeah, it's a really interesting time. And I think it's really the result of the efforts of many, many different people who are advocating for the arts over the decades, now really getting a lot of traction globally. So I don't see this as a trend whatsoever. This is really organic growth. And I think there's no turning back, actually, because the artistic talent is there. And I really look forward for all of you to gain more knowledge about the wonderful practice. So I think maybe I can open it up if you have questions. We have just under 10 minutes. If not, I can ask a follow-up question, but I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Oh, thanks.
For anybody in the panel? Yeah.
Hello. I noticed an incredible presence with the Korean Gallery Association titling and just a really strong contingent of Seoul-based, Busan-based galleries on the far side here. I'm wondering, could the panel speak more about what the Gallery Association is doing for the local art scene? Why is there such a strong presence? Just kind of excited to hear more about what that civic kind of contribution has been and how you're feeling kind of it on the constant programming tip and anything beyond that.
I guess I should answer that question. Well, of course, Gallery Association is a major institution in Korea. They've run a number of art fairs. The Kiaf, Korean International Art Fair, is actually the oldest in Korea. I believe they've been running over 20 years. And I would say two things. The government support for the arts. I think we're very lucky in Korea because very supportive. COMS, which is the Korean Arts Management Service, they provided the grant to the association to allow galleries to help them be here today. And they have their hands in many projects. All the major exhibitions you're seeing of Korean artists have gotten support from COMS. As an ex-gallerist, all of our artists apply for grants to make publications or do exhibitions, and they've been very generous. So I think that bodes very well, I think, for our art infrastructure. Specifically for Expo Chicago, I think it's just indicative of efforts by the Gallery Association to support their galleries to get more exposure to a global audience. As a platform, I think. Coming to art fairs, what are art fairs? In art fairs, of course, they want to meet collectors, but they also want to meet curators and the public to talk about their art. I think the best art fairs are the ones really that facilitate that dialogue. That's my job as a fair director. All I want to do is to facilitate maximum connections on behalf of the galleries for their artists. So that's just one example of what we're doing here. I think it's a really nice example, and hopefully one that continues. I think it's gotten off to a great start.
But I also believe that Korea has been doing a pretty good job to fostering its ecology, the art and design ecology in the country, and also promoting its soft power internationally to understand its impact basically back to the country to be able to also then grow the next generation of the artists in the nation as well. So it's a consistent, I think, support that is coming from public fund, as well as lots of young artists who kind of came about in a out of this economic sort of prosperity and also cultural kind of freedom that country experienced. So it's a good synergy, I believe, that is actually happening.
I think it's also important to note just the scale of the Gallery Association of Korea, because it's not just these 20 galleries, it's not just 40 or 60 galleries, it's like 250 galleries. So it is this sort of national association of gallery owners, essentially, sort of a trade cooperative organization. As Pat said, they're operating in numerous fairs, not just Kiaf, but other fairs throughout the year, to bring those galleries in front of a new audience and allow them to introduce, their artists on a big platform like this, where everyone's eyes are open and really excited to see new things and learn about new practices. So, this is just a very small sampling of really a massive organization.
Thank you so much for all the panelists. I've so much enjoyed this conversation. I wanted to ask a really stupid question, but what counts as Korean art? Is it because the artist was born in Korea, but perhaps isn't living there now and practicing artists? Do they count as Korean artists? And can you be a foreigner who settled in Korea now creating art? Does it have to hearken to something native to Korea itself? So I'm just wondering what falls under this rubric.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's. I can say we could. Yeah, we could use any number of sort of classifications to do that. But I think also that classification is not inherently meaningful at this point. And you know, even if we look back to Nam June-paik, right, 40, 50 years ago, as the father of video art, he's the only Korean artist who was really known outside of Korea, and yet he didn't necessarily identify as a Korean artist per se. I mean, he spent most of his life in Europe and the United States and became a U.S. citizen before he died. So you have many Korean artists these days who actively do not want to be considered Korean, and this is mostly the case for the artists who do live outside of Korea, in Europe, for example. I think that the word Korean is just a useful sort of mark of distinction in terms of, I don't know, bringing in what's already happening in the rest of sort of global popular culture, which is that Korean food, film, literature, music has this sort of global cachet. It's captivated the global interest. And I think, speaking for myself as someone who's actively trying to promote Korean art outside of Korea, having some kind of label can be useful in terms of just attaching this kind of mental tag to something. But I don't think that it is like a defining aspect of their practice. There's no like unifying theme amongst all Korean contemporary art.
I'm actually not sure if you're able, I'm gonna just say okay. If I'm, as an artist, I'm able to take a position to be labeled one way or the other. Like, I feel like after I came to US, and then if I have any curators to visit my studio or show my work, one of the many questions that I always was asked is how my Koreanness was expressed or embedded in my work. Before I came here, I never thought about it. It was just my work. So after I came here, that was the question that was always asked to me. So then that actually encouraged me almost to think about deeper and answer that question as intellectually possible, because I don't want to look dumb, So I want to really think about, I thought about my identity. So I think that is not the position necessarily I feel like I chose. I think that label was given to me because of who I am or perception that other people have. So I think, at some point maybe it will go away, at least for me or many artists who grew up from Korea or came here and worked as a Korean artist. But I think we are not there yet because the world didn't give that to us yet. That's kind of my take.
I just add to that, funny, it's a great question. I don't know that we can answer that question, but I also remember as an ex-gallerist, Wonji and I, we used to say, they're Korean artists. And I'm like, no, we never pushed that. We're not a Korean, no, they're artists. They're just artists. We used to say that all the time, but there's no answer. But I remember we used to also think that, right? But there's no one or right or wrong answer because they are inherently, that's their identity. But we also didn't want to push Koreanness per se as a label, But yeah, it's an interesting question. No right answer, I think, and I agree with Jiseon. Yeah, basically. I don't know if we have time for one. Are we done? Okay. Well, I just got the signal, which I think means that we're done. I'd just like to thank all of you for the time to be here today. I know it's not enough time to just scratch the surface, basically. I hope you get a glimpse of sort of the machinations that are happening in Korea and the tremendous artistic talent. And I hope you take the time to learn more, continue to learn more, to continue to support. I'd like to thank everyone here on the panel for their time and providing their insight. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you, everyone.